Hi, hello, and welcome back to the HII Method. My name is Jen Hatz. I am the host of the HII Method podcast and also the founder of the HII Method, a holistic, integrative, and innovative approach to assessing and optimizing human health, well-being, and performance. And I'm partnered with Neuroforce One, a human performance company that has been training champions for years. And they offer training and assessments in their facility as well as remote options available. And after the last episode, I started talking about I did talk about the big three when it comes to protecting and prioritizing your brain health and what that means for changing some different lifestyle factors, different things, different decisions that you can make within your lifestyle in order to protect and prioritize your brain health. And the big three that we talked about was sleep, prioritizing sleep, deprioritizing alcohol and really reducing or eliminating alcohol, and removing or eliminating all of those sugar-sweetened drinks, including sports drinks and sodas and juices and everything that could be having this very large impact on your blood glucose regulations because of this high concentration of sugars and sweeteners that are very rapidly absorbed. So today, for this episode, we're going to get into a little more detail about that third thing that I just talked about trying to reduce or eliminate all of those sugar-sweetened drinks and trying to really prioritize and promote your blood glucose regulations, as well as a few other effects that can play a role with this relationship with this high amount of sugar intake. So talking about sugar specifically can be a bit of an inflammatory topic. That was a little bit of a pun there. That I was going to say no pun intended, but that was definitely intended because that was a cute one there. So it is absolutely an inflammatory topic to talk about. You get a whole lot of debate and a whole lot of contrasting opinions. And in some cases, this can get a little heated because sugar itself is a very misunderstood word, first of all. So we're going to define that in a second here. But then the different opinions and context surrounding it start to get very heated because sweetness the taste perception of sweetness, what we sense as sweetness in different chemicals in our foods, that has a very strong positive neurochemical response. So we actually perceive sweetness as this really high quality, rewarding feeling and sensation. And that can be triggered through, in this case, this taste sensation. So different chemicals that we are tasting through our taste buds trigger this neurochemical response of sweetness. But we also identify sweetness as something that is a highly desirable feeling or association, some way to balance out for the less desirable, more challenging, more stressful, more hurtful situations or experiences in our lives. And we may often come to that statement of, I could use something sweet right now, as you know, a statement that we want to taste something sweet. But in a lot of ways, the psychology behind sweetness and what it means for us to provide something sweet to ourselves, especially as a way to balance or to counteract something that is maybe not so sweet, there tends to be that stronger association, that much stronger of an association, that relationship that we start to build with these different items or experiences that provide this neurochemical response. And so when it comes to the topic of sugar, you start to get this very strong contrasting of opinions, I think really because of the fact that we have this strong neurochemical response to the taste sensation of sweetness. So that strong contrast of opinions can look like if for instance, if we started to put out really like I was gonna say very strong recommendations of one side or the other side of either like, yes, it's okay, totally safe to have, that can be taken to an extreme and very quickly mismanaged with how much we're taking in because we've been given the okay to have it. So now we're going to have it. Right. And then the complete opposite of that is like, no, don't have any of it or extremely limit it entirely because it's not good for you, it's bad for you, it's toxic, whatever the verbiage is that tends to be trending around the topic. And now you swing hard to the other side of these very high levels of fear and restriction now around this substance. And that can very quickly feel like you are deprived, like you need to sacrifice, and going all the way back to that psychological association that we build with sweetness within that neurochemical response of sweetness. So because of that, this entire topic, like I said, gets a bit inflammatory. But then when we talk about what sugar actually is and what it means, and as we start to define it and peel back the layers here, you can start to see that me saying that it's inflammatory is actually like a correct way to define it. We'll just say that. We'll start with that there. But that there is, in fact, a need to focus on what is an appropriate amount, how much is too much, what is it actually doing in our bodies, what should we be focusing on, should we be afraid of it, should we be okay with it, all of these questions, and hopefully starting to address some of the misconceptions about it too. So sugar as a word, and this is where a lot of the confusion starts. So sugar, when we talk about sugar in this context specifically, what we're really talking about, what I'm talking about, is the added sugar to our diet. So we're talking about refined sugars, the sugars that are added to processed foods in order to enhance the flavor and the taste. Sugars that have been refined, meaning that something that was maybe at one point in time an existing whole food source has been extracted and refined to the point that it's this high concentration of this sweetness. And so that's what we would refer to as like a refined sugar. So it's not just table sugar or something that you would literally add to your coffee. What we're talking about is the end product of this refined substance that is this high concentration of sweetness. And like I said, that it's added to different foods, different drinks. It's added across the board to a variety of things. But think of sugar in this context, that it's something that is not what would be the naturally occurring sugars that are already present in the whole foods. When I say that, I'm talking about naturally occurring sugars that are present in fruits as a whole fruit, in vegetables as a whole vegetable, in different grains or legumes, and all of these different sugars. So if that part that I just said sounds confusing, that's because that's the next point. The fact that sugar, as a term sugar, is also used as a term to describe what is a saccharide or a monosaccharide or a disaccharide. These are the simple sugars, quote unquote, of what a carbohydrate gets broken down into in your body. So if you've heard some of those like little like messages or quotes out there that, oh, well, it just turns into sugar in your body. Like, don't eat carbs because they turn into sugar in your body. That's that exact concept that I'm explaining here. The fact that sugar, that word sugar, is used interchangeably with what is the most basic unit of a carbohydrate. So the basic unit of a carbohydrate is a saccharide or a monosaccharide or a disaccharide. So if we talk about what those saccharides look like, what the monosaccharides look like, first of all, glucose, fructose, and galactose are your primary monosaccharides. And then when they're coupled up in certain little couplets, that creates disaccharides of sucrose, lactose, and maltose. And so you have these, it's basically, to try to give a broad scale definition here, those simple sugars, quote unquote, of what we're talking about here, those different molecules that I just named off, that's just what a carbohydrate food is being broken down into. It's just the most basic unit of that carbohydrate food, but we call it sugar in the body when it's at that end point of digestion. And now this bleeds into the third point of why we have confusion around this topic, because those little monosaccharides, specifically that glucose, we have something called blood glucose or called blood sugar. And so if you've heard about how important it is to regulate your blood sugar, that it can be critical, it can be detrimental to your health, to your brain, to your function, to your life, if your blood sugar is out of whack. If it's elevated, if it's dropped. So because we use that term blood sugar to define or as a term as well as your blood glucose, that also adds to this layer of confusion of, well, how much do we actually need for our safety? How much do we need? Is it really that bad? So that's probably there's probably that much more maybe going into it of why there's that much confusion. But I think those big 3 points are why we have a lot of confusion around the word sugar and why there is such a wide variety of perspectives and therefore recommendations on how to approach it, because the term itself can be defined in a few different ways, and therefore the different, let's say a governing body or different organization that is providing recommendations, whatever their definition of sugar is that they're using, they're going to give recommendations based on that definition. So if you ever Google what are the sugar recommendations, you're going to see a whole list of different organizations. These could be, like government agencies. These could be different food or nutrition organizations. These could be something that is completely separate from food and health and from the government. It could be a hospital that is coming out with these recommendations, and they're all a wide variety. None of them really zero in on one specific definition, because they're all viewing sugar through this variety of different perspectives, really. That you have your blood sugar that you need to maintain at a stable concentration. You have sugar that is the end product of carbohydrates when they're digested. And then you also have sugar as being what is added sugar, what is refined sugar added to all of these different foods. So hopefully to try to zero in on the topic to, move away some of that confusion for you, we're focusing on the topic of sugar and sweeteners within that first category that I described of the added sugars, refined sugars, what has been taken, what has been really processed or extracted or refined down from what was an otherwise existing food source and now is instead altered into this new thing that is now added or used entirely because of its high concentration of sweetness. That's what we're focused on. Everything else that I just talked about when it comes to carbohydrates being broken down into sugar and regulating your blood glucose or your blood sugar, all of that can be learned and studied and known through the performance wellness course that I have linked in the show notes for you. And I go in depth into the process of really identifying carbohydrate foods and what varieties, how much you need, what is a realistic amount to be aiming for, what you need to be looking for, everything that you could ever possibly need to know about those sides of the equation here when we talk about sugar. So that's all in the performance wellness course. Again, that is linked in the show notes. Now going back to those refined sugars that I was talking about. So the biggest source of these refined or processed or added sugars, it might be a little hard to first receive and accept this truth. But so when we think of refined sugar or added sugars, we might think immediately about foods or different food products that have sugar added to them, like cookies or donuts or baked goods and desserts and foods that have sugar in them or added to them. So that's not wrong. The problem is if we focus entirely on that as being the critical piece to focus on, we miss the really big gaping elephant in the room. And that is drinks that contain these sugars or these high concentrations of sweeteners. That's the big elephant in the room that needs to be addressed that isn't, because everyone's turned their focus towards dessert. So instead, focusing on those drinks, that is the highest amount, that's the highest concentration of sugar that you are more than likely taking in without realizing it. It's that much harder for you to manage and control the amount you're taking in and the rate that you're taking it in because it's in the form of a liquid. So you absorb it, you don't digest it really, you just very quickly absorb it through your stomach and small intestine specifically. Now your small intestine, if you remember those episodes I talked about your gut health and how you have all these microbes within your GI tract, guess what? When you absorb all of those quick digesting sugars in the form of this liquid, you are feeding all of those microbes, all of that sugar. They are getting saturated with that sugar. It's feeding them. And they don't do well on all of that sugar. They don't do well when they are constantly saturated with that sugar. And they start to give off very potentially toxic or cytotoxic byproducts from their own metabolism that has been impaired. So your gut bacteria do very poorly on a diet that is very high in that refined sugars, and specifically coming in the form of those liquids because it's just saturating them. On top of that, not only is it their metabolic health, your metabolic health also suffers as a result of this very high concentration of sugars that are very rapidly absorbed, because this is going to immediately impact your blood glucose concentrations. Those blood sugars that I said are so critical to have them maintained and steady and really just in control. So your blood sugar, your blood glucose is going to naturally elevate after you eat a meal because what you've just eaten has been added into your blood, your circulating blood. So you naturally have this elevation, and then you will naturally have a reduction back down when everything's been processed and removed from the blood, so that way it's back in the cells wherever it needs to go. And so you'll have a natural reduction then, and then once you eat, you'll have a natural elevation again. So you do have these natural ebbs and flows in your blood glucose throughout the day. What is problematic is when you have these very large spikes in your blood glucose, up and then down and up and down. Now, where that comes from, very largely from these high concentrations of very quick digesting sugars. That is the primary culprit for these very sharp rises in your blood glucose, and then you would eventually, very quickly, have a sharp drop in your blood glucose, which might give you that sharp, craving or feeling of hunger that you need something immediately. Maybe if you've ever gotten the hangry symptoms, you're all of a sudden like very angry and like you're like flipping a switch right now with your personality because you need food now. Like that's a sign that your blood glucose is not regulated, that you need to prioritize regulating that blood glucose a little stronger. So that might mean having choices in your foods and in your drinks that are going to promote that more steady, stable blood glucose concentrations and regulations. Again, that's all detailed in the Performance Wellness course. But so when you are then drinking these high concentrations of sugars, you're impacting your metabolic health, your gut health, and also your brain health. So specifically, of all of the different sugars and sweeteners, there is a specific connection between fructose and a high amount of fructose with neuroinflammation. So that's actually promoting damage to your brain in response to a high amount of fructose. Now, the sources that we would get this high amount of fructose are very largely from drinks, from sweetened drinks. And this is not just sodas. This is also, and very heavily, the variety of drinks that are sweetened in some way. So when I say that, sweetened in some way. So when we talk about sweeteners here. Now, for the sake of trying to best simplify the messaging here, when I'm talking about sweeteners, what we're talking about are sweeteners that contain calories. So we're talking about they're termed nutritive sweeteners because they contain calories. Non-nutritive sweeteners, so sweeteners that don't contain calories, and there are natural non-nutritive sweeteners like stevia, and there's also artificial non-nutritive sweeteners like Splenda, which is like sucralose, or Equal, or I'm trying to think what the other one is. Sugar alcohols also like xylitol. So all of your non-nutritive sweeteners are in a separate category from what we're talking about here with sweeteners and sugar because of that difference in the caloric content of the sweetener itself. Now, just to make a quick mention, because there are some debates about artificial sweeteners, whether or not they are safe or healthy, or whether or not they impact your GI tract and your gut bacteria. So the research on these sweeteners, on these different non-nutritive sweeteners or calorie-free or artificial sweeteners, is that there is maybe a slight change in your GI tract, in your bacterial concentrations in your GI tract, but that slight change does not compare to the change in your GI tract and the change in your neuroinflammation in response to fructose. So the attention that is being paid towards non-nutritive sweeteners or artificial sweeteners needs to be redirected. It needs to be directed away from seeing them as a problem and instead turn towards the big elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, the fact that it's the amount of fructose, the concentration and the rapid absorption of fructose in our diets, specifically through our drinks, that is promoting these problems for our gut bacteria and also problems for our brain health, as well as our overall metabolic health. So I'm going to keep hammering that in, that the big elephant in the room is fructose. So now where are these sources of fructose coming from though? So all of the different sugar sweetened drinks and different types of sweetened drinks. So whether or not you see sugar on the label, there are different sweeteners. Well, different sweeteners can be identified by a variety of names. And this is probably the fourth little thing of why there's so much confusion on the topic, because there's no one term used for a sugar or sweetener. There's a variety of them. The biggest thing to focus on, if you're trying to identify whether or not something contains either a high amount of a sugar or sweetener that you should be concerned with, is to start asking these questions of, okay, is this food or drink that I'm having, has it been sweetened in some way or manipulated in some way, or is it the naturally occurring state that it comes in? So what that can look like is asking yourself, okay, if this drink that I'm having, it tastes really sweet. So now I'm going to look at the label and I'm going to see, does it contain calories? Are those calories from a sugar, from something that is either listed as a carbohydrate, listed as an added sugar, listed in some way, depending on the label and what the ingredients say, you might be able to identify what it is that it's sweetened with. If it's, let's say it's sweetened and like it tastes sweet when you drink it, and you look at the label and there's no calories in it, it's calorie free, chances are it's one of those non-nutritive sweeteners that I just talked about. But the flip side of that is that you look at the label and there are calories. Let's say there's anywhere from 20 to 40 grams of carbohydrates, and you look right below that and it's just as much carbohydrates is coming from added sugars. Now you know very clearly, okay, that drink is sweet because of these added sugars, because of whatever the sweeteners are. Doesn't matter what the ingredients are listing as those added sugars. You know that you're having this high amount of sugar being added into your GI tract, whatever the source of that sugar is. Now, these different sources of sugar, like I said, can be a variety of different things. And I'm actually going to link a blog that I wrote that lists out the different types of sugars and sweeteners, the different types of names, so that way you can start to identify if you are looking at a label. But another thing to keep in mind, because we don't always have a label on what we're taking in, sometimes we're doing what we have been told is what is best, and we're doing what we think is the healthiest option for us. And that can be drinking something that is a juice, even a 100% fruit juice, or a fresh pressed vegetable juice, or a fresh pressed fruit juice, or a smoothie that we are making for ourselves that has, let's say the smoothie has a banana and a bunch of berries and some orange juice and some milk and all of this stuff crammed into this drink. Everything that I just explained there, that's all a high amount of sugar being rapidly absorbed. Even though it started off as a fruit or a vegetable, you started to extract the juice separate from the fiber, and or you started to concentrate a whole lot of them and really manipulate a whole lot of them to fit into this small, dense concentration for you to drink. So you took all of those existing sugars from all of those fruits and packed them into this drink that you're now drinking. So that mentality that having like a smoothie with all this stuff packed into it is better for us is unfortunately very misleading. And it can unfortunately push people down a route that they don't need to be going down when it comes to prioritizing their health, their physical health, their mental health, their GI tract, their brain health, because what they're doing, I mean, the intention is solid. You're trying to get the most nutrition that you could possibly get out of this meal. The problem is the approach is not what your body is actually prepared to do. It's not what your body's meant to be doing. We're not meant to be digesting and absorbing this high amount, this high concentration of all of these sugars, all of this stuff being concentrated down for us to try to take in and absorb very rapidly. We're not designed for that. So a better approach in this sense, as old school as it may seem, is to remove the blender out of the equation, to view those foods as already existing in their most ideal state. You are going to get the most nutrition out of that banana by just eating that banana, not by blending it with a bunch of other stuff. And you are going to get the most nutrition out of that orange by just eating that single orange, not by blending it or juicing it with a bunch of other oranges to get this really small concentration of orange juice. So the what did they say, that the poison is in the dose or something? So think of that, right? In terms of these different foods that you're having, and that, yes, you want to prioritize a nutrient-dense diet. What you don't want to prioritize is a high concentration of sugars in order to get that nutrient density, because you're adding like gasoline on the fire that you're trying to put out. So to try to simplify everything that we just covered today, is the fact that sugar itself is a very inflammatory topic, but that there is a variety of different opinions on sugar and different perspectives on sugar. And so what we need to do, I think, is, instead of trying to stigmatize sugar as if it is bad or as if it is entirely good and useful and needed, we need to view sugar as it is. What is the source that it is coming from? What is the type of sugar or sweetener that I'm taking in? How much of it? Is it coming in a whole food form, or is it coming in a liquid form? Is there maybe a better alternative I can make, right? Is this something that is, like I said, is it a smoothie that I can just cut out the smoothie and just eat the whole fruit with other foods? Or is it something where maybe it is just a special occasion? You just want to have a slice of cake at a wedding because that's part of the social experience of being at a wedding, is that you just have a piece of cake to celebrate, you know? And so I think allowing ourselves to view what it is that we're taking in, why we're taking it in, what the concentration is, and overall really prioritizing the fact that our body is prepared to handle a certain amount regardless of our intentions, really. So as long as we are leading with those good intentions to promote our health, we're going to continue to find those best steps forward on how to protect our health. And hopefully everyone now can shout from the rooftops to identify the big elephant in the room about that high fructose intake. But all right, I hope that helped everyone on at least identifying some of your sugar tendencies, and hopefully alleviate some of the stress or the fear around sugar, and to allow yourself to have some sweetness in your life. Take care.